Welcome to Planet Geo, the podcast where we talk about our amazing planet, how it works, and why it matters to you. And that's right.
Yeah.
Those were the days. Those were the days, man. Chris, today we are part 3. We're part 3 here of a many-part series. We could go on and on and on, but it's a good time to be a geologist, and there's a couple very explicit reasons why. And we're going to talk about the reason number 3 here is that the answers are in the rocks, which this is one that I know you're passionate about. I'm super passionate about. It just strikes close to home. Like, we like rocks. I don't know. What is your favorite category of rock? And I don't mean igneous, metamorphic, sedimentary, but like, what is your favorite, like, subgroup of rocks, would you say?
Well, you're putting me on the spot right now. Holy crap. Like, that's like asking me who my favorite child is right there. It's like, oh, are you serious? Oh my gosh.
I think I know. Do you want me to lead the witness here?
What do you think? Yeah. What do you think? Yeah.
I think your answer is going to be contact metamorphic rocks. Or pegmatite rocks. But I only say that because those are the ones that you and I have like gone chasing after the most.
Yeah, for sure. We have, yeah. And I love contact metamorphism is such a cool thing. I always think of, when I think of contact metamorphism in the field, that is just shockingly obvious, is like Glacier National Park. When you have this massive syncline that goes through all the Helena limestone, and you can see it's this diorite intrusion, really, really thick. And, limestone is really not a very exciting rock to me. I hope I don't offend too many people with that statement, but it just doesn't do it for me. I know.
You got to whisper that.
It just doesn't. It's, but I've described limestone is this rock that has so many looks. It's like the Katy Perry of the rocks. And to me anyway, because I can never spot Katy Perry. But you see this limestone, then above and below the intrusion, you have this beautiful bleached marble. It's amazing. And it is a really cool thing. But Jesse, I think I'm going to go with my favorite as being pegmatites for sure, and regionally metamorphosed rocks.
Okay. Schists and granulites and amphibolites and things like this.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good one. Contact metamorphism is, frankly, it's on my mind a little bit right now.
Why is that? Why is that?
Well, it's just there's a lot of it in eastern Pennsylvania. When the opening of the Atlantic has happened, there's all these dikes that intruded in, diabase dikes or dolerite dikes. They intruded in and they altered a lot of the rocks around them, turned, limestones into marbles and turned schists into very much more hydrothermally altered schists. And it's a process that's really interesting and very dramatic. Actually created a lot of the original iron ore formations that kind of fueled the Industrial Revolution in eastern North America.
Yeah. What's the scale of some of this contact metamorphism? What are we talking about?
Yeah, it's incredibly variable, and they're not huge. Like, the deposits that get formed are not huge ones by any means. They're not, giant ore deposits, but they were enough to be a resource, in the Industrial Revolution time. So the scale is hundreds of meters, probably at most, around some of these, and it gets bigger around some of the bigger intrusions, but not far. You can, one of the famous marbles, well, it's actually this really cool conglomerate, breccia marble. There's columns of, it's called Potomac marble or Calico marble. Anyway, you can go through areas where it's really marble, and then some parts where it's much more like a limestone matrix. It falls apart like crazy, and so it's really variable, the scale of this stuff. So anyway,
however, that said, Jesse, I feel like that's not your answer. Is it your answer? Is contact metamorphism?
I think it is at the moment. It is
at the moment. Yeah. Okay, I'll tell you.
Yeah, just because they form such pretty, amazing, beautiful rocks. And Chris, the point here in this, we've been talking, where'd we come from? We came from a couple episodes where we talked about, this sort of buy low, sell high idea, that it's a good time to be a geologist at baseline just because there are less geologists being trained right now. it's not as popular as it was before as a skill set. So that means it's more
and
valuable.
we think we're heading towards a peak. Yes.
And then part 2, we're heading towards a peak. We are going to have we as geoscientists are going to be in demand in the future. Last sort of episode in this series, we talked about one reason we think that is that the solutions are at depth. A lot of the solutions to the climate change events, a lot of the problems are at the surface, but the solutions are at depth. And when we get to depth, we need geoscientists and geologists to think about these things. And there's a lead on part to that, which we're going to talk about today, which is the answers. A lot of the answers that we talk about to climate change are in the rocks themselves. And not only in the rocks, but in the rock record, which I think is a really important thing. Like, Earth has done the reactions that we want to have happen. We just need to look closely at the rock record and look at what has happened in nature, and we can do this again, or sort of think about possible solution sets.
Something else, Jesse, that I thought about after we got off from our last episode recording this. I didn't call you. We haven't talked much the last couple of days. We were talking about copper porphyry.
Yeah, I've missed you, Chris. I've missed you.
Yeah, I know. I can imagine. I know. I'm sorry.
He says,
I'm a little busy. Well, if we go like a day without talking, it's an odd day. It just feels just off.
True.
Like, what's the matter with you, Chris? I didn't talk to Jesse today. I'm pissed.
I didn't have my rant.
So, Jesse, one of my favorite places on the planet is on top of Avalanche Peak in Yellowstone National Park. And that, when you go off the other side of Avalanche, heading east, you leave the park right away and you're in Shoshone National Forest. And it's all of this like andesite porphyry, this porphyritic andesite. And Jesse, it is loaded with copper. This porphyry,
right.
Okay. I mean, it's just so that occurred to me after we got off recording, and I was like, man, why didn't I bring that up? Because it's one of my favorite things. In fact, it's so prevalent you can actually see like raw copper in the rock.
Oh, really?
It hasn't all oxidized out. Yeah, it's amazing stuff. Yeah,
very pretty.
Yeah, it's very abundant. Yeah.
Well,
so anyway,
Chris, the answers in the rock thing, I think we should harken back to our episode that we did. We've done several episodes. There's actually one of our visual podcast series on the CampGeo mobile app. First link in your show notes is on Earth's climate. And we talk a lot in Earth's climate about climate cycles and the fact that the greenhouse effect, we should be very happy that the greenhouse effect is here, right? It makes Earth habitable. And actually Earth has, what's that?
We're a fan. Yes, we like
fan.
the greenhouse.
We're a big fan of the greenhouse effect. And Earth has these climate cycles, right? There's these long-term feedback loops that we talked about, the long carbon cycle, that you kind of bounce between different thermostat settings. The Earth has this internal thermostat, and the thermostat is controlled naturally by things like weathering and by interesting reactions that occur between the atmosphere and oceans and rocks. And all those things require geologists.
Sorry to interrupt you, Jesse.
Go for
it. Sorry, Jesse. I got to interrupt you because I just had a question today from a student who always asks very insightful questions, and he gets lots of Jolly Ranchers from me.
Wait a minute. No,
yeah.
you give
I have a
Jolly
question
Ranchers
jar.
for good questions?
I do. I'm the gatekeeper of good questions, and if they ask a good question in class, and it could on topic, off topic, they get Jolly Ranchers. So I'm dispersing this. So anyway, he's always good for it, and he asked me today. And I don't remember why we were on this topic because we're way past this. But he said, so Mr. Bullheis, if plate tectonics was stopped for some reason on Earth, would we be able to like stay here? Would we be able to survive that? And my answer was no, actually, we would not. It would take a while. I mean, geologically it would take a bit, but we would lose our ability to cycle carbon. And, so I went into all that, but I just got that question today, which I thought was really insightful. Yeah.
Chris, this is, we're going to pick up, let's go turn to image number 1 here a minute so we can kind of start talking about what we mean by this. Answers are in the rocks themselves. This is a chart. We've talked about this. We've shown this image in our CampGeo content. The first, class you'd take in a college level geology program would be physical geology. You talk about metamorphism. This plot right here is metamorphism, and all it is showing the different fields that we as petrologists think about metamorphism as. And basically what it is there are different spots in pressure temperature space. Metamorphism is pressure plus temperature. You're heating up and squeezing the rock, and at different pressure and temperature conditions, different things happen to the rocks. And so we kind of map these out into what we call different facies or different fields. That this chart, pressure is going up as you go down in the y-axis, so it's kind of like the surface of the earth is at the top, and as we go down it gets deeper, higher pressure. And temperature is going from 0 to 800 degrees on the right side. So as you go down into the right, you're getting higher temperature, higher pressure. All I wanted to make, I think, or all we should really make on this is that we left off talking about geothermal energy last episode in this series, and how, you know, we're getting down to 200, 300, sometimes even 400 degrees in these enhanced geothermal systems. This is a metamorphic reaction space now. Like, we're a couple kilometers down in the crust. We're at many hundreds of degrees. Reactions are occurring in rocks, and these are metamorphic reactions. And Chris, I don't think it'd be interesting to know from our listeners how many people have heard the term prehnite Pompelliite facies before. Because I mean, yeah, that's sure. There's no way I even bring that up in class, in my intro level class. Do you talk about this in your class? Prehnite?
No, in fact, that was. I think this is no. Heck no. There's something that is worth like going over, spending maybe a minute or two on this diagram here, because you know, you got green schists and amphibolites and granulites and blue schist and eclogites and all these things. All right, if you take an intro level geology class, they basically know none of these terms.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
I think that's got to change. I think there's in part because of this conversation we're having right now, like, this is going to be relevant. We think this is our pitch. This is going to be newly relevant to society in a way that it wasn't, 20, 30 years ago, maybe. However, sorry, continue. I interrupted you there.
No, I guess like let's run through some of these. You know, what is a green schist? What's an amphibolite? What's a granulite? Can we put those in context? I think a lot of our listeners have some varying degrees of background in geoscience, but a lot of them probably they're not really intimately familiar with some of these rocks that we're talking about, or hosts of rocks.
Yeah, the names are confusing. We're geologists, so we don't have a consistent naming scheme. We just got to make it up on the fly. The names come from the name of the rock that is produced if you take basalt and put it at these conditions. So if I take a basalt and heat it up to 400 degrees centigrade, put it at 4 kilobars, which is about 12 kilometers or 15 kilometers in the crust, it's going to be a green schist, because that's the name of the rock that the basalt turns into. We've talked about green schist before.
It's a chlorite schist, right? Yeah,
chlorite,
yeah.
Sometimes actinolite. It's this very deep, dark forest green kind of color.
God, that brings back memories,
green.
Jesse.
I know.
Actinolite that we got.
Height the land. Height the land.
That's right. Yeah, you're right. So I show green schist. I just don't use the term green schist,
Right. Yeah.
Then,
no, for sure. Because it's a deeper, this is something you'd hit in our 200 level classes on, rocks and minerals, start to talk about this stuff.
So if you take that green schist and you subject it to higher temperatures and pressures, then it turns into what's called amphibolite. So what's the difference between amphibolite and green schist?
Amphibolite just says it's the same recipe, it just has transformed a bit. And in amphibolite, we will have plagioclase and hornblende will be the two minerals in that
it'll
rock.
be a calcium-rich plagioclase, mostly kind of one of these darker colored plagioclases.
Yeah, because it started from a basalt. We're still keeping the same recipe. And then that amphibolite, if you keep heat, sometimes you'll have garnet in there, and if it's deeper pressure, you'll get more garnet. You can have a garnet amphibolite. If you keep heating it up and keep putting it under pressure, eventually it'll start to melt. And once it melts, the melt leaves, and what's left is a granulite, which has little water in it. It has lost all the goodies to the melt phase, and that's a granulite. You can go the opposite direction. You can put it deep but cold or cool, and you can have a blue schist, which is a very common subduction zone type of rock, blue schist and eclogite. So it's just different pressure temperature conditions take the same rock recipe and make different minerals out of it. All you're changing is pressure. So
Jesse, can I most students are familiar with rocks like the various degrees of schist. A mica schist, muscovite biotite schist, or a garnet schist, or a sillimanite schist, or a kyanite schist, right?
Oh, you mean as you kind of get hotter and hotter and hotter you go.
Yeah.
change
Those
Okay.
they index different conditions, but the only real difference between those rocks and the rocks that we're talking about here, because the rocks I just said are, I think, more familiar to everybody else. Right? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah,
you think?
totally. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
You're starting with a different parent rock. You're not starting with basalt necessarily. You're starting with maybe like shale, and you're metamorphosing shale.
Oh, yes, that's a great
these-
point. That's a great point, Chris. So what we've been talking about is take a basalt recipe and subject it to
right.
these pressure temperature conditions. The vagaries of metamorphic petrology mean that metamorphic petrologists have defined the field, the pressure temperature area, so the areas outlined as green schist on this map right here, this pressure temperature map. The name of that field, that is now a facies or a facies. That's a field in pressure temperature space. You could put any recipe rock through that. So you could take your shale and you could subject it to green schist facies metamorphism or granulite facies metamorphism, which just means you're putting it in that pressure temperature space. It's very confusing because, the field is named after the basalt recipe, but you can put anything into the recipe and put it at these pressure temperature conditions. And the point that's really important here, Chris, is that I think like petrologists, you and I, what type of schist is your favorite, Chris?
Boy, I have.
I'm really stumping you today with these
no.
questions.
It's like I'm gonna say it's just gonna sound simple, but it's an absolutely beautiful rock. I have a slab that's the size of a small lab table. That is just beautiful biotite schist. I mean, it's nothing but biotite. And I love that rock. It's just so shockingly beautiful. Yeah. That's what I'm going with.
Well, okay, that's a good one then, because that's actually a lower temperature. That's a lower grade version of schist, which is more in the green schist facies. And my point, if you gave a different answer, I was expecting you to say garnet or selimanite garnet or garnet kyanite, right?
Yeah.
But because those are higher temperature, they're bigger minerals, they're really beautiful. Like, people are attracted to those types of schists. They're higher temperature. They're also scientifically quite interesting. These higher temperature stuff, there's a lot more interesting reactions that occur when you get to amphibolite and granulite and stuff like that. However, our view of the future is that things like lower green schist, prehnite pompelia, this zeolite grade, which is like pretty low temperature on the metamorphic scale, that's where a lot of interesting stuff is happening. Many of the interesting reactions, the answers are in the rocks. The rocks that have the answers are kind of these lower temperature conditions, which are, I think, newly interesting. And that's an opportunity when things are like perhaps understudied, let's say.
So
that's a huge
basically,
opportunity.
Let's go into a couple examples on this, Jesse, like, how the answers are in the rocks. And I think we've said this before. I don't know if we have or not, but Earth has a playbook, and all we have to do is understand what's happening in the Earth. And it's done these things before. It's done it without us, these reactions and these really, really cool things. And one of which is the nuclear reactors. These, we did an episode way back when on ancient nukes. And what a perfect example of what we're talking about. The answer to what happened has always been right there. Earth did it. This was back in time when you had the critical mass of uranium-235. It hadn't decayed down below that limit yet. And we had ancient nuclear reactors that were occurring on their own, which is just, that's such a cool thing. And that's just an example of Earth's playbook, if you will.
Oh, I agree completely with you, Chris. I mean, it's such a important aspect. It's a perfect example of how these natural nuclear reactors were not discovered till well after the Manhattan Project and after World War II had ended. And so nuclear scientists had proposed and come up with nuclear reactors before they knew that nature had done it for us. Nature did it like 2 billion years ago. And they would discover it, and it's like, wow, okay, this happened, and we can use it to study and understand nuclear processes, nuclear reactions that occurred in the rock record. It's one of the coolest stories out there. There's a couple really relevant ones, too, here, Chris, especially as we go forward. We've talked again about this climate thermostat. Earth has this thermostat, and weathering is a really important process in here, right? Like, and this is a picture of... This is a serpentinite. So this would be an ultramafic rock coming out of the mantle, and it's full of these white veins with nice, beautiful reaction halos around it. Those white veins are carbonate. And when you hear the word carbonate, you think CO2 sequestered into a mineral. That's what carbonate is. It's magnesium carbonate or calcium carbonate. You basically take a cation, a positive ion, and you mix it with a carbonate or a carbon anion, CO something anion, and you form a mineral. And when we talk about carbon sequestration, carbon storage, carbon capture, really what we're talking about is making minerals from carbon, taking carbon out of the atmosphere and making minerals. And this is an example. This is a photo that shows that this has been done before. Nature does this all the time. And there are companies, many companies that have been spun up in the last decade, 2 decades, that are based on this reaction. You're taking rock, you're altering it, you're weathering it, and you're drawing CO2 out of the atmosphere and locking it up for thousands to many tens or millions of years in this mineral phase. So this is just one example. I think this is I don't know. I love this example, Chris.
I do too. It's a totally natural process, right? And then we've actually talked about this before of like, is there a way to do this at the surface? Then like take these, mafic or ultramafic rocks and crush them up as well as we can and sprinkle them out and just kind of like kitty litter massive parts of the surface of the earth to like speed the process up, add water, let it go. Right.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And you know what, Chris, there are, I would say, dozens of companies that have been started that are attempting to do this at scale. They're taking, well, what do you need? Okay, take some basalt or take some peridotite, some
okay, hold on.
rock.
Why basalt? Why these rocks? These rocks are just, they're the most, or I should say, let me say it this way, they're the least stable at the surface of the earth.
Yeah.
These are, they're mafic, these minerals are high temperature, minerals. And so when they're at the surface, minerals are happiest when they exist in the conditions which they formed. These are not at that. They're far away from that. And so they're chemically susceptible to this kind of weathering, to taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere.
What do you need? You need a cation that will bond with carbon to form a mineral. I think people can kind of think of this. What are very common carbonate minerals? You've got calcite, CO3, right? That's a very common one. You've got the magnesium version of this, or magnesium substitution, that can fit in there, right? And you can do that in different proportions. So calcium and magnesium, sometimes iron, are the 3 that we kind of think of that form carbonate minerals really nicely. And so you need rocks that are high in magnesium, calcium, and iron, and those are usually mafic or ultramafic rocks. And also pyroxenes are very easy to break down. Olivines are easy to break down. They weather really quickly. So if you can think of a way to do that, then there's probably a company that's been spun up already doing that, whether it's taking basalt, crushing it up and spreading it on farmers' fields and then trying to measure how much carbon is being drawn down by that weathering process, because weathering goes faster if you crush it up more, or people saying, let's find this at depth, let's inject hot CO2 into it, and then this reaction is actually the reaction that does this thing we're seeing in the rocks record in this photo, actually releases some heat to it and has some volume change. So it could become a kind of a self-sustaining reaction in a way, depending on how you engineer it. So this is a space that geologists, I want to reiterate that, are starting companies in this space. And I don't know, not all of them are going to work. Most of them are not going to work, but some of them might, right? It's a startup company. Some of them might. And that's kind of the important thing. And the answer, Earth has done this for us before. We just need to look at Earth. And
absolutely, that's a really good point. Hey, I'm a little curious though. You have not really called it out by name. You've, this carbon sequestration using mafic and ultramafic rocks, crushing them up and just kind of sprinkling them out and add water to it and let it rip. This process though is called serpentinization, and you have a picture of serpentinite right here as your example of it. And this is a really important process. If we can do this at depth, where you add water to this rock and you create this secondary mineralization. But Jesse, there's also another really important byproduct, especially if this is done at depth, to the serpentinization. Am I right about this? Like the byproduct of hydrogen gas.
Oh, yes. Okay, hold that thought, Chris. I want to come back to that. Let's come back to that because I have one more example of the rocks kind of contain, the answers are in the rocks here, is that if
are you going to talk about gypsum now?
Just a brief, because you live on top of a gypsum mine, and I grew up in gypsum country, right? And we're gonna hopefully have an interview with Ollie Yagutz, a professor at MIT who's been involved in this particular use case. But to do this carbon sequestration, you don't necessarily need ultramafic rocks. You just need calcium or iron, right? To make calcite.
You need the cations. Yep.
Need the cations, and gypsum isn't one way to get this stuff. And these people, it's a patent out of MIT and a potentially startup company, and we're gonna talk to Ali about this process. So we'll go into it in more detail later. But you can look and think, oh wait, gypsum, that might be easier to break down. Maybe there's some biologically mediated ways to drive this reaction forward. But you just look again. It's looking at the rock record and saying, oh, this happened here in this setting. That's interesting. Maybe we can engineer that to happen more. And it's just a beautiful story of looking at the rocks, saying this has happened. I'm observing it here. I understand the processes that went into it. I understand the implications of this reaction, because all we're trying to do when we talk about carbon sequestration is really we're trying to drive weathering faster. That's kind of it.
Hey, one quick thing, Jesse. I think we should just point this out, that gypsum can be used for this process because gypsum is calcium sulfate. So it has
I skipped over that. Yes, got too excited.
Yep.
Skipped right over it. Yeah.
It's got water in it too. It's calcium sulfate H2O, but it's got the calcium ion, that cation that's very important then in carbon sequestration, right?
Yeah. That's right. So, and you could, produce all sorts of interesting byproducts with this as well. You brought up serpentinization and hydrogen production, Chris. This, oh man, there's like this, our Dean Lee Kump, who we interviewed recently, said this in a meeting one time. He's like, you know what? There's this serpentinization. It's the one reaction to rule them all. And I was like, oh, that's a great turn of phrase. One reaction to rule them all. And the question is, why is that? What is serpentinization? Serpentinization is taking ultramafic rock, creating serpentine minerals, serpentine group minerals. And we've talked about some of these. They're the really greasy, sort of fibrous minerals that occur in ultramafic.
Asbestos-like, yes.
Asbestos-like, yes. Great point. You take ultramafic rock and you weather it. You put water in there, and it does a lot of these kind of crazy reactions, or potentially really useful reactions. So first of all, we can sequester CO2. We make calcite. We carbonate this thing by the water goes in, it has some CO2 dissolved in it. It reacts with the calcium or the magnesium and forms carbonate veins in the rock. The other thing it does is it can release H2, hydrogen. And Chris, this is an image. Okay, this is a little bit complicated. I don't think we need to go into all the details of this, but this came from a paper published in Science, is kind of an opinion piece in 2 years ago. And the title was Hidden Hydrogen. It posed a question that said, hydrogen is this like potentially amazing energy source. We can burn it. It does not produce CO2 when you burn it, basically taking H2 and making H2O out of it. You can... But
it's dirty to make.
It's dirty to create, because you have to take water and break water apart to make the hydrogen. People are doing that. Energy utility companies are doing that with wind farms or solar farms. They'll take the energy from those renewables, use it to do this electrolysis, produce hydrogen gas, and then ship the hydrogen gas around, which you can then burn in various vehicles, etc. There's a whole sort of economy around that. But the proposal was, wait, is there a lot of hydrogen that's being produced in the earth that we don't know about? And this came out in 2023, and it was amazing, Chris. I've never seen the entire geological community start talking about one idea overnight as fast as this happened. Like, this took everybody by storm. Every department, people from astrobiology communities to metamorphic petrologists to geophysicists were talking about geological hydrogen for a little bit. And it just it came on the scene because the idea was there are some seeps where there's a lot of hydrogen coming out of the earth. If there's more of that around, that would be really important to know. And the realization was like, we don't understand how this is produced, how geological hydrogen
stores in the rocks. That's right.
Stores in rocks, but it does happen. And so this image kind of shows several different ways by which hydrogen can be produced naturally in the earth. We can do it by alpha decay. Basically, uranium thorium atoms are decaying away, and those alpha particles hit a water molecule, break it apart into H2 and O2, and the O binds with something else. But the main way to do it is the bottom one here, where we have iron-rich, what do they call here, mantle rock. They think peridotite or ultramafic or basaltic rock.
Olivine-rich rocks, yes, yeah.
Olivine-rich rocks. And if you take olivine, add water, these reactions, this serpentinization process will produce H2, will produce hydrogen gas. Now, we've always thought of hydrogen as being it's too small. It'll escape. Like, it won't get trapped like hydrocarbons. Hydrocarbons get trapped because it's a bigger molecule, it can get stored in the earth. Hydrogen, we think, just kind of leaks out everywhere. That's the traditional thinking. But the question is, wait, maybe it doesn't just seep out everywhere. Maybe it does get aggregated and concentrated in the earth in certain areas. The other thing is that microbes like to eat hydrogen. It's a very efficient energy source, so microbes kind of eat it. So we need to find these areas where microbes are not eating the hydrogen, and it's actually like we could actually harvest the hydrogen somewhere. And so it's just one of these fields that it's wide open to study. These fairy circles, Chris, you've heard of fairy circles, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think. Do you think most people have?
No, I don't think so. No, I don't know though. I don't know. Hey, I want to go back though to something before we move on to this. I want to, you talked about like, okay, serpentinization, you add water to olivine, especially if it's hot and it's salty water. It's very efficient at doing this. That's doing two things. It's removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere because it's creating carbonates in the veins of the rock. So it's carbon sequestration, but it's also giving off as a byproduct hydrogen gas, H2. And so you got both things that are exciting to geoscientists going on with the same reaction, right? I just wanted to double click on that. Like, that's
so cool. And Chris, let's add one more thing to it. Why would the dean of our college say this is the one reaction to rule them all? Well, what also happens is that turns out these ultramafic rocks have a lot of nickel in them. They have a lot of cobalt in them. So what if you could inject a bunch of stuff down there, drive these reactions, produce hydrogen, capture CO2, and also get a bunch of critical minerals out of this stuff? I mean, that's why it's like one reaction to rule them all, because you basically take, and it's actually very complicated. Like, these reactions are not simple ones. You take a mix of minerals and you react them with water, you produce another mix of minerals and some gases and some byproducts. It gets really complicated, and you produce silica, so you can produce like pure quartz veins in these types of rocks here. You get a lot of magnetite forming, you get hydrogen gas, and so there's all sorts of different reactions going on here. But let's just say the people who study and understand serpentinization reactions are quite popular now, because this is a very relevant reaction to our future, maybe even,
that's crazy.
On this planet. So
Jesse, I have a question for you in your research world and your doctorate world.
Hold on, let me get my finger in the air, Chris. Let me just put my nose up while I answer this.
I'm trying to think scale, and is there enough room to serpentinize all of these rocks and sequester the carbon and create all this hydrogen, and then potentially some of the rare earth elements as well, like you just last said? But is fracking a part of this process then? Like hydraulically fracturing rock to create more avenues and space for this process?
Chris, this is the key question. I mean, I don't know the answer to this. You're asking the key question though, and there's a couple parts to it. First of all, we don't know. We don't know what the solution is going to be here. So we just don't know. There's a lot of people raising a lot of money to do carbon sequestration at scale, and they're thinking that they could do it at scale. There's a lot of people who argue that it's not going to be possible at scale, that you can't just spread basalt on farmland and draw down the amount of CO2 that we will need to draw down to solve climate change. Will it do a little bit? Yeah. Will it do enough to matter? There are people who argue it will not. But it's an open, I think it's a wide open space. So to your question of like doing this at scale, that's like the question. Can you do this efficiently? Can you do any of this stuff we're talking about efficiently at scale in an economically relevant way is an open question. But I think that's important to consider. Yeah. But when it comes to fracking,
that's where my mind goes right away. Yeah.
Yeah. But if your fracking question is a really good one. And I think usually when we're dealing with these questions at depth, like if we want to take a bunch of peridotite that's down beneath, the the Appalachian Basin or beneath the Michigan Basin. Michigan, underneath of Southwest Michigan, is actually kind of highly prospective for hydrogen because the mid-continent rift basalt stuff is thought to be kind of down beneath the basin and in the basement rocks down there. So could you, if you're going to drill down, whatever, 5 kilometers and hit the basement underneath of the sediment layer in Michigan, and you're going to want to drive these reactions, you're not going to want to just inject it along one vein. You're probably going to want to frack that rock and get more surface area to do more of the reaction more quickly. I think that's probably going to be a solution set, or going to be involved in a lot of these potential solutions, if any of them end up really working well, I guess. So you're bringing up like really the question, and there's a lot of debate about this, and there's people on both sides of this aisle, especially when it comes to carbon sequestration and the potential sort of for carbon sequestration to really make an impact. It's probably going to be, we gotta throw a bunch of ideas out there. We got to try everything, and then we'll see what works. Like most of it's going to fail, and we got to be okay with that. So
we don't know where the answers are yet. You know, it is exciting. Yeah.
And to me, that's the super exciting part. And I just like these things, like looking at the rocks and these fairy circles. Because I want to go back to these fairy circles.
Yeah, what are you bringing that up for? What do you?
Because if you look at, I mean, this image, it kind of stood out in this image and in this article about these fairy circles. And I've heard of fairy circles before and seen them on maps, like LiDAR maps or topography maps.
Is this in Africa?
This one, I believe it is, or is this in the coastal Carolinas? I think it might be in Africa. But basically, the argument is that in these fairy circles, which are these kind of weird, slight topography changes, but vegetation changes, the argument was that these might be hydrogen seeps, areas where higher concentrations of hydrogen are coming out of the ground.
Okay.
And, maybe could
just replacing what
they're kind of seeping out of the soil, and for some reason, it's the hydrogen's not being consumed in the soil profile by bacteria, but is actually kind of seeping out and changing the plant life in that area. And there's the huge forget if it's North Carolina, South Carolina, and the coast in the Carolinas, there's these huge areas of fairy circles. They're just really all over the place. And so, one of the arguments was that this might be a way to think about or sort of map hydrogen production at depth and think about where it might be occurring.
So is that still an open question? Are these enriched in hydrogen seeping out? I mean, because that seems like that would be an easy thing to answer.
I think are these
enriched?
It's a good question, Chris. I think that there's decent evidence that these are enriched, at least a little bit enriched, whether that's the primary cause of the fairy circle feature itself or not. Where the geological hydrogen is an open question. Like the USGS just produced I think it was a hydrogen prospectivity map of the United States, and it's at pretty coarse resolution. It's like saying Michigan is kind of prospective, or there's like not a ton of detail to this map because, again, go back to our episode previously. A lot of the solutions are at depth. We've got a lot of these reactions are happening down deep in the basement rocks at the bottom of a big sedimentary basin. And so, we don't know a lot about what's going on.
That's so cool.
So it's very cool. It's very cool stuff to think about and very important.
I got to say that doing this series that we're talking about right now has really been transformative in the things that come up in my own classes. What about you? You got to have the same kind of thing, don't you, or not?
Yeah, I just kind of I have there's a new bounce to the work day. It's like there's exciting problems to work on, and I'm certainly shifting what I'm interested in thinking about on a day-to-day basis and researching and talking about and learning about. What papers I choose to read are very different now. Like I have very limited time to just read papers to learn like I used to do. So now it's much more selective and be like, no, I'm going to read this one that is about fluid flow in basins because that's actually really interesting now. Whereas 5 years ago, I would have never read that paper. I would have been reading about the early Earth or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so, that's right. That's right. So that's so interesting the way your career has kind of shifted. I have for some reason, my upperclassmen this year heading to university next year. It's like a bunch of very, very, very good students that are heading into geoscience.
Okay, you got a good, strong cohort kind of vibe going on.
And they are just top notch, and it's exciting to think about, what they're going to do. Because some of these are honestly, Jesse, some of these are the best that I've ever had. And they're
let's
heading
not
in this
get carried
direction.
away, Chris. I mean, our friend Andy and I in the same class. I mean,
I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry.
We're
you met a couple of them
here,
huh? Yeah. They're really, really, really good. In fact,
awesome.
you were at
That's
the
great.
HEF. You were at the HEF thing, getting inducted, and that was really cool. And I just had a thought. One of my students that you met her there, Rachel.
Yeah.
I see that in her future is just, and she's one of many. I maybe shouldn't single her out because there are just a bunch of other really awesome students coming out that are top notch, and they're heading in this direction. And I'm excited to kind of see, where they go and what they do, because they're fired up about this kind of stuff. Absolutely. Yep.
Go set the world on fire, because it's there, it's open, and there's geology is a great. I kind of like the geosciences is maybe. I think it's maybe not on the same playing field as biotech, but like biotech, right? We have this idea of like, go into advanced microbiology, you're going to make some money. You're going to be doing cool stuff. You're going to be working for these big companies and doing really cool stuff and cutting edge research. And I think geoscience is headed in that direction, that you're going to be able to have these opportunities. And that's going to kind of become part of the cultural conversation that, oh, you're a geologist or geoscientist. That's cool. You must be working on interesting, cool stuff that has some prestige associated with it, right?
Wouldn't that be nice to see that to fruition, Jesse?
You know what, Chris? It'll happen just in time for you to die.
Thanks.
Yeah,
thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah. That's great. All right.
No, I mean that's a very glass half full kind of approach, but I don't know. It might be true. It might be true.
Yep. All right.
Well,
hey,
what do you
Jesse,
think?
what's coming up next? I think to wrap this series up, at least wrap it up for now, because I don't think we're done. But for now, we will be. And we're going to come out with a 4th episode on just like how do geoscientists think about the world? It's thinking about the world in a different sort of way. We do approach things differently, I think. And that's what we're going to, and kind of just wrap this all up with that idea.
Yeah, I think that's right. And we'll talk about sort of business creation and entrepreneurship and all that kind of stuff eventually at some point too. But yeah, for now, the answers are in the rocks. The answers are in the rocks. We need to look at what nature's done for us, and that takes a good geologist to look at that, right? Follow that playbook.
Right,
I like that. Yep. That's a good place to be. Hey, you can follow us on all the social medias. We're at Planet Geocast. Download our CampGeo mobile app. It's the first link in the show notes. Lots of visual podcast series there to enhance your learning on all sorts of topics, from the introductory courses to some Geology of the National Park series that we have on there. You can follow us on YouTube. Leave a like, subscribe, or a comment. If you're on Spotify too, please leave us a comment and a like and a follow. We appreciate all of that.
Cheers.
Peace.